What's up, everybody? Welcome to Paiper Zombie Productions, home of the original ZTV. I am Paiper Zombie, your host as always, and on today's episode, we'll be taking a look at the 1988 sci-fi horror film Pulse. So, like we always do right about this time, let's get into it. Pulse opens just outside of a power plant in somewhere USA, where a lightning storm is raging overhead. A bolt of lightning strikes the ground near the facility, and despite the fact that ground is ground and should therefore ground out lightning, this particular lightning is able to travel through the ground, which allows it to enter the power facility's energy distribution system. From there, it travels out along the power wires until it eventually reaches a town. In a neighborhood somewhere in that town, the quietness of the midnight hour is suddenly shattered by shouting, crashing, and thrashing. Bill, played by Cliff DeYoung, as well as his wife Ellen, played by Roxanne Hart, are awoken by the commotion. Looking out through their bedroom window, Bill and Ellen find that the source of the commotion is their neighbor across the street. They can see his shadow against the front room curtains, and that shadow is attacking something with a weapon as if life itself depended on it. Bill tells Ellen to call the police, while Bill himself decides to go outside and have a better look at his neighbor. When Bill goes out, he finds out that he's not the only one who's out there. All of his other neighbors have also come out of their homes, and they're looking over at the rowdy neighbor's place trying to figure out what's going on. Suddenly, the entire front room of the rowdy neighbor's house illuminates with a bright blue flash of light. Then, the entire house goes dark, and rowdy neighbor is no longer rowdy. Once the police arrive, strange upgrades to bizarre the moment they open the front door. A stream of water comes pouring out to greet them. Their survey of the front room shows that it's been through some things, and the kitchen is flooding due to the kitchen sink. And this is where the police find the formerly rowdy neighbor, who appears to have been electrocuted to death and is lying face down in the water. Cut to a week later, where we meet Bill's one and only child, David, played by Joey Lawrence. On the ride home from the airport with Bill and Ellen, Ellen tells him about what happened with the neighbor the week before. Unfortunately, there's still no answers as to what happened. So it's been assumed that the neighbor, Mr. Jordan, just snapped like a twig because he couldn't deal with the recent death of his wife. Skip ahead to the evening of the next day. Bill and Ellen have to step out to attend a business dinner, so that means David gets run of the house while they're gone. But David doesn't abuse his position. The only heathen thing he does is put 8 pounds of chocolate mix into his chocolate milk. The blissfully chocolatey rush is going just fine when the television starts to receive interference that eventually makes it impossible to watch the picture on the screen. Since he doesn't have permission to watch the television in his father and Ellen's room, David goes upstairs to his own room and turns on the radio to continue listening to the game. While he's listening, a sound from outside his window takes him over to it. He sees that it's just a police patrol car moving through the neighborhood. But that's when David hears another sound, an electrical one. When he looks over at the power line, he can see tiny blue bolts of energy dancing between the transformer and the wires leading into his father's house. But don't worry about that though, because a bumping noise from somewhere in the house is David's next concern. Not sure if his father and Ellen have returned home, he goes downstairs but gets sidetracked once he hits the front room. The television that he turned off earlier is back on, but the picture on the screen isn't a regular picture. It's a black screen with a beam of light on it that keeps drawing the same image over and over again. While David is watching that, the movie takes us inside the television where a huge party dedicated to irregularity is happening. Tiny blue bolts of energy are dancing around the various electronic pieces of the television. And I'm personally not sure of what's happening in this scene, but what I assume is that the energy is restructuring various points on the electronic boards and altering the boards. Not sure. But when the energy is done with this, the television turns itself back off. But don't worry about that though, because another sound from further back in the house is David's main concern now. David follows this sound into the laundry room and to the dryer. In a complete lapse of judgment, he opens the bottom of the dryer and takes a look inside to see what's going on. The same blue bolts of energy that were having a party in the television are now partying here. They're causing the dryer's pilot igniter to trigger uncontrollably. During one of those triggers, the igniter ignites, but it doesn't just spark a small flame. Instead, it sparks a flame jet, which shoots out and directly at David's face. Fortunately, David is able to get out of the way just in time to miss the jet. Bill and Ellen come back into the house through the garage at this moment. David is like, hey, dryer, and then this TV. But the only signs of strangeness the adults can find is that the television, which is back on for a second time, won't turn off without being unplugged. The next day, David tries to balance the abnormal with some normal. He attempts to gain the favor of a group of neighborhood boys by showing them how well he could skateboard. Unfortunately, he gets distracted and almost causes one of the other boys to crash and burn. Though David fell with that group of boys, he does succeed in gaining the favor of another younger neighborhood boy. This is Stevie, played by Matthew Lawrence, who, as the last name indicates, is the real-life younger brother of Joey Lawrence. Stevie turns out to be a little chatterbox, with a mad love for using the staple 80s word bad to mean cool. At least his chatter is informative, though, and he tells David all about Mr. Jordan. Stevie says that Mr. Jordan was a mean man who hated for the neighborhood kids to play in his yard. In fact, before his death, he'd accused all of them of poisoning his grass and causing it to die. But all of this is nothing compared to what Stevie has to say about Mr. Jordan's wife. She was killed one day by a metal piece that shot up out of the garbage disposal while she was attempting to check it.
Isn't that fair?
We end the day with that to think about and move on to the next day. David wakes up to his father and Ellen talking outside in the front yard. Bill is talking loud as hell so he could be heard over the car engine and asks Ellen if the grass has been getting enough water up by the door. He's noticed that it's starting to die. After his father's gone to work, David goes outside to the front yard himself to see if what was said about the grass is true. After David sees that it is, he begins to wonder if whatever happened at Mr. Jordan's house is starting to happen to his. David decides to let his inner Hardy boy out and investigate Mr. Jordan's derelict house. He tries to recruit Stevie to go with him, but Stevie ain't having none of that.
Stevie, get back here right now! Stevie! No way! Stevie!
Alone, David investigates the bottom floor of Mr. Jordan's house. Most of the evidence he finds points to Mr. Jordan not having a liking for things that needed to use electricity. The TV is busted, the light fixtures on the wall are all bashed in and seared, hacked main wire hangs from the ceiling in more than one place. Yeah, Mr. Jordan went off. David is in the kitchen searching for more clues when the living one decides to come clipping down through the ceiling. This is Old Man. Yes, that's actually his name in this movie, and he's played by Charles Tyner. After Old Man and David get over the initial surprise of seeing each other there, Old Man asks David if it talks to him. When David has no clue what the hell Old Man is talking about, Old Man elaborates and says, the voice inside the wires. When David still has no clue, Old Man says that he's seen 20 houses just like Mr. Jordan's, and that he knows all about what happened. But since people have called him crazy, he won't tell what it is. All of this is enough for David. Once his father comes home, he tries to convince him and Ellen that whatever was in Mr. Jordan's house is now in their house, and that if they continue to stay in the house, they'll be in danger. Now you know what's going to happen, right? Yep, as per usual, when a child tries to warn their parents of danger, Bill doesn't buy it. So David shows Bill just how serious he is about continuing to stay in the house by walking right out the front door. And that's what I'm talking about, because that's exactly what I would have done if I were David. If you two want to stay off in this house, hey, have at it. More power to you. As far as I'm concerned, though, I'm fin to go. David even taps into his heathen no-hado power when Bill comes outside to stop him from leaving. Kicking, screaming, disagreeing. Bill has to literally drag his boy back into the house with the neighbors across the street just watching the whole show. Later that night, Ellen shows why she's the mostly smart one in the relationship. All of what's happened throughout the day has marinated on her brain, and she asks Bill if it's possible that what David is saying is true. Of course, Bill doesn't think it's possible, and he rationalizes David's fear as just being scared because Old Man scared him. The next day, David finds himself home alone when Ellen has to go handle work business. And guess what? He still ain't staying in that house. He goes over to Stevie's house to ask his friend if he knows where the nearest airport or bus station is. When Stevie can't help him with that, David moves on to his next idea. He's about to drive the car to whichever place he passes by first that will get him back home. However, he realizes that that might not be such a good idea and abandons ship. He finds a surprise when he tries to go back into the house. The door won't open. When he tries the garage door, it just stutters repeatedly and won't open as well. As David tries to figure out another way to get out, a thin bolt of electricity cascades down a pipe of some sort in the garage and cracks it open. It causes some kind of gas to escape, and whatever the gas is, it's fast acting. As soon as it hits the air, David starts coughing. He tries to open the garage again, but the machine that opens it begins to malfunction and just adds more smoke to the mix. David tries to push the garage door open, but it won't budge. Being smart about his resources, he gets into the car and rolls up all of the windows, but one stubborn, raggedy window won't roll up all the way. In desperation, David starts the car and uses it to back into the garage door. This pushes the door open just enough for him to crawl out underneath. He does that and is just in time to almost get hit by Ellen, who has come back home from her business. Later that day, while David is recovering, Ellen tells Bill that she's convinced something is happening in the house. While she was awake the night before, listening to all the regular sounds a house can make, she heard something out of the ordinary. Some kind of voice. And it was growing inside the house. Bill is looking at her like, Ellen, do you know how crazy you sound? And Ellen is like, isn't that exactly what we said about Mr. Jordan before he came up dead? Cut to the next day, where Ellen spies activity over at Mr. Jordan's house. She doesn't hesitate to go over and confront Old Man and ask him what he knows about the houses. Old Man tells her that what she's dealing with isn't a thing, but a signal. A pulse to be exact. And if she wants to stop it, they need to disconnect themselves from any and everything in the house that uses electricity. Ellen takes this advice to heart when she returns home and goes to take a shower, because she doesn't turn on the wall heater. But remember how I said she's the mostly smart one of the relationship? Here's that lapse in smart right here, because she doesn't realize that she's already messed up in school by taking a shower in the first place. But she realizes it when that water goes from pleasantly warm to searing hot. When she tries to turn the water off, the knob won't turn off. And when she tries to open the shower doors, they won't open because they're locked. Don't ask what kind of shower doors come with locks, because none do. We don't know how this works, it just does. Lucky for the situation, Bill came home early from work, and he's able to make it upstairs and break the glass on the shower door to get Ellen out. But it's not in time to stop that water from tearing all her skin up. Now here's where Bill actually lets a glimmer of smart shine through when he decides to bunk himself and David up at a neighbor's house for the night. But later, when he can't sleep, Bill hears a strange sound just barely on the wind. Some kind of voice. When he goes to the window to search for the source of the voice, he finds himself looking in the direction of his own house. Ready to test the theory of if something is really inside his house or not, Bill decides to go and investigate. His investigation of the house finds it otherwise normal until he gets upstairs. The cooler and the television in his bedroom are on despite having been left off. No time to worry about that though, because the sound of the garbage disposal turning off and on downstairs is what's on Bill's mind now. When he arrives in the kitchen to see what's going on, he finds that the garbage disposal is turning itself off and on. Proving that the smart is starting to fire more often, Bill goes to kill all the power in the house at the circuit breaker. That's when the furnace down in the basement decides to turn on somehow. When Bill goes to investigate, the power saw on the table across from him suddenly turns on too. A group of conveniently placed nails vibrate toward the blade and, yeah, you guessed it, one of them catches the blade and fires at Bill. The nail strikes him in the head, drawing blood and knocking him out cold. Meanwhile, Bill and the house aren't the only ones awake. David has been watching the house from the neighbor's place ever since he heard Bill leave. Afraid that his father might be in trouble, he goes over to the house to find him. With no keys, David finds his way into the house through the back door. Reminding us that he hasn't forgotten what happened in the garage, David puts a trash can down to make sure that the back door stays open. Not sure where his father is, David goes upstairs after hearing what sounds like a baby crying. As he goes upstairs, all of the bars on the automated protection system quietly activate, blocking access to all windows in the house. In his father's room, David is drawn to the television, which is showing some crazy Silent Hill type stuff on his screen. And all I have to say is I want to know what that movie is all about. It's one that Bill and Ellen rent, and David accidentally plays a scene from it when the television acts up during the baseball game earlier in the movie. Like, you know what, just check these scenes out and tell me they don't look like some Silent Hill PT mess. See, looks like something out of Silent Hill, huh? Anyway, back to the review. From the television, a beam suddenly shoots out and begins scanning David's head. Luckily, it doesn't hurt him, thank goodness, because nobody wanted to see kid brains all over the place, but it does hypnotize him for a moment. David is able to break free of the beam's hypnotic power, and he runs from the room. He goes downstairs and tries to use the phone to call for help, but the phone is dead. On the plan 2, he tries to run out of the back door, but finds that the washing machine is conveniently flooding the floor, covering the area. The fuse box just happens to be posted in this area, and it decides to start shooting bolts of electricity down into the water to electrify it. On the plan 3, David runs back into the front room, breaks the window, and, knowing that he's not about to fit through those bars, starts calling for help. Meanwhile, down in the basement, Bill comes to and hears David calling for help. With electrified water pouring in through the basement door, he has to find another way out and improvises by going through one of the vent holes in the floor. That's when the Pulse decides it's done playing games. It begins to overload the power circuits. It corners David in his bedroom, where it sets the room on fire by causing all of the electrical wires on the outlets and the switches to burn. Fortunately, Bill makes it up and through the vent by this point, and he comes to David's rescue. After having to hack the front door open with an axe because Bill accidentally lost his keys while he was in the basement, both father and son escape the Pulse. Now, when they come out, every last neighbor is standing out in their front yard trying to figure out what's going on. Bill decides to keep the show going by going over to the power line and chopping it down. Unfortunately, the pole lands on his house. There goes the insurance money. But since that's where the Pulse was based, it appears to destroy it. The police are confused about the situation when they arrive, but anyway, Bill and David find themselves riding in the back of a patrol car. When one of the cops tells Bill that he's crazy for destroying his own house, Bill agrees, "Yeah, I am. Crazy indeed." We leave Bill and David to go about their merry way, and we return to the neighborhood. All the commotion has died down, but little Stevie lies in his bed, awake and alert. He spots his clock on the wall, which appears to be having an electrical problem with its circuits. Proving that he's still not about to have anything to do with Scary, Stevie gets out of bed, reaches for the plug to the clock, and pulls it out of the wall. And it's on this maybe, maybe not, that Pulse comes to an end. So that, ladies and gents, is Pulse. It was written and directed by Paul Golding, whose crown jewel for writing is none other than 1984's epic breakdance film Beat Street. The film's musical score was composed by Jay Ferguson, whose previous work included Pictures of You from the Terminator soundtrack, and he would also go on to compose the soundtrack for 1989's A Nightmare on Elm Street 5. Personally, I don't think Pulse is quite a B movie, it's more like an A- movie. The budget is definitely A, and the acting is also definitely A. Clifty Young's Bill comes across as a loving spouse and father who's trying to do right and gain the favor of his son, but he just can't accept the strange truth of what's happening around him until 0 hour. Roxanne Hart's Ellen comes across as an equally loving spouse, and she's an excellent balance to Bill's skeptic. David brings out the best of her maternal instincts, and you could tell that she cares very much for him. She doesn't turn a blind eye to his claims about the Pulse, and she doesn't turn a blind eye to the things that are going on around her. Joey Lawrence's David doesn't come across as a self-entitled little brat, but as an intelligent, quick-thinking kid. He doesn't have any of the stereotypical problems with his stepmother, and he loves his father enough that he'd go into a house full of death just to make sure that he's okay. Even Charles Tyner's old man comes across as a believable person that seems crazy and kooky at first, but once you realize that he actually has all the answers, you wish he was just crazy and kooky. I feel like this could have easily been an A movie if the plot would have been more finely tuned. We could have used some more information or backstory on Old Man and how he came to know about the pulse in the first place. We also could have used some more info about the pulse itself. If it's a signal, where in the world did it come from? Earth? Outer space? It's left way too vague in my opinion. But I guess that was done in order to let the Pulse get away with some of the stunts it pulled, like the ability to lock a shower door even though the thing has no lock anywhere on it. All in all, I think Pulse is a cool little techno horror movie that won't win any awards, but it's definitely worth the watch if you're in the mood for a thriller that doesn't sell out to Jeep scares and effects every 5 seconds with a good shot of drama. And that'll just about do it for this movie review. So as always, I'd like to thank you all for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll catch you next time.